Hi, a very good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for our inaugural conversation series by Private Space Medical. So just a little bit about who we are. So Private Space Medical is a mental health clinic with a passion for mental health awareness and education. And so we started this conversation series just to provide space and opportunity to get started on discussing topics that matter relevant to mental health. So for today, we have our two very distinguished guests. We have Ms. Moonlake Lee from Unlocking ADHD and Mr. Asher Low, Executive Director of Limitless. And of course, we have our very own psychiatrist, Dr. Tay Kai Hong, who will also be sharing his inputs into the topic for today, which brings us to the topic of self-advocacy. So let's get started with advocacy first, because that's a pretty broad term. So Unlocking ADHD and Limitless can be considered advocacy groups, I think. And I guess we just are very interested to find out what were some of your motivations behind setting up your respective organizations. So I'll just leave it to either Moonlake or Asher to chime in at this point.
Asher, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. I mean, when you think about Limitless, Limitless was started as a safe space for young people to reach out for help. In fact, we didn't start with mental health in mind. We started to, my initial idea was to start to have a safe space for the Abeng, the Alien, right, the street kids, right? Because that's where I came from. That was where I spent the majority of my career. And the interesting thing about it is that we started a helpline. We started counseling and case management, and when we opened it up to the public, all the young people who came in the first month, like literally the first 30 people, I remember the very first client was a girl who had eating disorder, right, was being bullied in school. And then the next one we had came in with like MDD, right? Then the next one that came in, also had MDD. Then we had someone who had like depression, sorry, not depression, had anxiety, right? And it never ended, right? So we realized that this is the need. This is the need out there on the ground. And as a social worker, I think it's important for me to kind of like understand and flow with the need of the youths and the people that we're working with. So we made the decision like, hey, if this is the need, then we will serve the need. And that's when we started going into mental health work. Yeah. And we recognize that, advocacy is a big term. We can advocate for other people by speaking up on their behalf. We can advocate for other people by advocating for policy change. We can advocate for other people by helping to psychoeducate the public, right? But at the same time, while we are doing all those things, I would say that if the need is still there, and we're advocating for all that good stuff, right? But there's nowhere that these young people can turn to for help, then all their advocacy will be for naught. So we recognize that we don't just have to advocate, we also have to provide the service. And when we open our doors to provide those services, really, the first year we had 80 youths, and it started to increase from there on. Like then the next year we had 200 something. The next year we had 300 something, right? And we are I would say we are in our 5th or 6th year. And last year we had 937 youths reach out to us for help. And we really see that, with advocacy comes the need to have that space to hold the people that are going to come in. Yeah. But that said, though, right, we don't just want to advocate on that level. Advocating to youths is advocating to youths. Advocating to your population, right, is advocating to your population. But we also want to understand that, aside from advocating to the population, we can also advocate to the other key stakeholders. So we are also talking about parents, teachers. We did an entire, we gathered together with 6 other organizations, and we built a whole training series together with them on trauma-informed care, which we use to educate teachers, educate other professionals, for a good 2 years. So we don't just want to advocate to the youth, but to the parents, to the teachers, to their youth workers, to the pastors, right? The leaders, in the community, to the imam in the mosque, right? And we want to go even higher. We want to try to move to see whether or not we can move the needle, and engage government, right? Engage schools. So advocacy can be many things.
Absolutely, yeah.
It really can be many things. But I would say that if you are out there and you're thinking about starting something, start where you're comfortable. Start where you already have something in your hand to kind of work on. And for us, it was starting with direct services. Yeah.
So what you're saying is that advocacy is really providing that voice to the persons who really need that.
Yeah.
And reaching out to multiple stakeholders to get things moving, providing them the safe space, the holding area, and access to services.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned that Limitless has been in the game for about 5.5 years to 6?
5 to 6 years around there.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I ask Asher? At the beginning, say in the first month or two, how did you make sure that your safe space and Limitless was publicized to the public such that it is accessible to youths in the community?
At the point of time, it was just me
Okay.
and a bunch of volunteers, right? So I knew that I couldn't take too many cases. Yeah. I
Because it was a
couldn't-
small team.
Yeah, it was a very small team and very lean team, and there was one professional, one mental health professional, right?
Yeah.
So we started our very first outreach, right, was to the northeast area. So we worked with the Southeast CDC, we worked with the Serangoon area, right? I know it doesn't make sense, Southeast, Northeast, but Northeast according to MRT line, right?
Yeah.
And we actually took the opportunity to do research. So we did research. We did it on World Happiness Day on March 10, right? And we managed to get funding to print frisbees.
Nice.
So we had 3,000 frisbees, right? Then we printed pamphlets. So we got chat to come in and look through the pamphlet and say okay, this looks good and all that, right? So then we went out to the schools in the area. So we had 20 or 30 volunteers that day. So some of them camped out outside San Gabriel, some camped out outside Zhonghua, some camped out at the MRT station to catch the Marie Stella boys, right? So we they were camping out everywhere to go and just get. What we were trying to do is this: we were trying to help youth understand that mental health is a thing. They can get support for their mental well-being. Today is World Happiness Day. Be happy, right? But at the same time, here we are. And at the same time, we were getting research, right? So using that data from there, we work with SUSS. We probably presented at conferences and all that. We're trying to get our name out there. But one other thing that we did that was very, 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 very key was that we made our presence known online. So for me, I believe that it's important to build, maybe you can say it's building a brand, but also it's about being relevant to your audience. And we design our website to be relevant. We design our materials to be relevant. We hired people and we got volunteers that were relevant.
Right.
Right. And
So what you're saying is that as an advocacy group, you really need to know, who your target audience is and creating resources that's specifically catered, including even taking action steps like going to the schools, camping out there, really getting your name out there and your service out there.
yeah, and because we're working with youth, right? So they are all online. So we made sure that the way you get our services will be through our website.
Okay.
So you write in,
Yeah.
and then we'll contact you, and then we make sure that we are relevant service to them.
Yeah.
So we don't require you to come to the FSC, or we don't require you to come to the counseling room.
So it's direct access.
Yeah,
To you.
so we have that direct access. We do, the first conversations on WhatsApp, right? So
Great.
so
So it
we,
sounds like it's come a long way in developing your service, and it's probably kind of changed and morphed and to become what it is today. And so I'm just curious, Moonlake was sharing about her organization and how it's in a very different stage from yours, and maybe you want to share a little bit about Unlocking ADHD at this point?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Farah. We're actually very young. As of this month, we are 8 months old as an organization. So really barely, in the crawling stage, right, like a human baby. And we didn't start off to be an advocacy group. I think it really started because there was a desire to make a difference. And if you ask me, like, why did I found Unlocking ADHD, it's really 3 reasons. The first one is really to bring hope to the ADHD community, because many of the parents struggle on a daily basis. And they wonder, like, could their child ever be independent and thrive? So I wanted to share from my own personal experience that it is possible. The second reason really is because there's a gap in information and resources about ADHD in Singapore. And if you looked and did a Google search, you really couldn't find much at that point in time. Even now, it's starting to, but not a whole lot about ADHD.
Yep.
So where do you go to get help?
Yeah.
So we wanted to do something to address that. And the third reason is really to equalize access to management of ADHD, because many people are shut off because either they don't know where to look or they cannot afford it. So we wanted to do something that was scalable so that more people can access help. Because ADHD, even though it's a neurodevelopmental disorder, it's very much treatable in a sense of knowing the right environment, the support systems, and the right response. You could actually overcome in terms of some of the limitations in the studies and emotions, and actually thrive very well. So it's, Singapore's a small country, and we always talk about the human potential.
Yeah.
And this is one way to unlock human potential. So again, we didn't start off to be an advocacy group. It's just to really share the hope. But as we did more and more work in this area, we found out that actually there's not that many support structures available. ADHD prevalence rate, I think, is about 5% globally, and yet that's about 272,500 people in Singapore. But there really isn't that much here.
Yeah.
Compared to, let's say, other conditions that are coexisting, comorbid, like dyslexia or ASD, much smaller percentage, but a lot of support. Yeah. And we know that it really impacts on learning as well as on mental health, the emotional side of things. The most common mental health issues with ADHD is anxiety and depression, something that in Singapore we're seeing a lot of right now. So it really was the right time to step up and do something.
Yeah.
And we're really targeting a broader group than Limitless. We're actually targeting parents on the one hand, youth as well as adult ADHDers. And I think ultimately what we want to do is really strengthen families, ADHD families.
Yeah.
And there's 2 ways. On the one hand is through the parent-child relationship, and the other hand is really through the marriage or long-term relationships. Because once you have a stable environment at home and also at school, at work, then there's the ability to thrive. So that's what we're doing right now.
Sounds like very important work. So what has your experience been so far in this past 8 months as you're setting this up?
I have never been so tired before, okay? I mean, seriously. Sometimes I wonder whether I bit off more than I can chew. But, we are seeing the impact in people's lives. We are seeing people that could not access a diagnosis of ADHD before and were struggling for many years in the wilderness, so to say. Once they were connected with the right help, then things really open up for them. And in my situation, my daughter was in secondary 3 and L1 R5, failing 5 out of 8 subjects at that age, and yet we knew that she had so much potential in her, and we couldn't figure out how to unlock it. And so that's when she had a diagnosis, and then things turned around for her. But again, it's a lifelong journey. So even though she's in terms of her career path, it sounds very promising at the moment. She's in university and doing a very competitive field, but it's still a process.
Yeah.
Same thing for myself. I was diagnosed at age 50, so most people think ADHD only affects children. That's not the case. Grown-ups have it, but it's just that no one knew that we had it at that age. So now we're discovering it, and I think that once grown-ups realize that what's been holding them back all those years is ADHD, and they know how to find ways to manage on a day-to-day basis, suddenly there's a lot of things that open up. And with the acceptance comes a lot of, the self-confidence starts coming back. And I think that's wonderful. It's a very healing kind of process.
Sense-making process, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. What was some of them, and it's open to you as well, Asha, like what were some of the barriers that you experienced in your journey in setting up your respective organizations?
I think the first thing is like, there's a lot of sacrifice involved. Yeah, there's really a lot of sacrifice involved. I think you don't just think about sacrifice with regards to money, because that's gonna be the biggest one, the most obvious one.
Yeah.
Right. It took me 2.5 years before I could start getting a partial salary. Yeah, and then another 1 year plus before I could start getting my salary. Right, and it's challenging, right? It's challenging if you think about it from that perspective. But at the same time, right, the sacrifice also comes in terms of time, because you end up realizing that for a large portion of it, you end up having to do everything. Yeah, you have to do the accounts, you have to do the outreach, you have to get people involved, you have to man the helpline, right? Work with the clients. And in the first year, I was literally, at midnight, I was talking to clients on my phone, into the wee hours of the morning. It also takes a toll on your family.
Yeah.
Because your family, the ones behind the scenes are as much, are heroes because they are the ones who run with you, but they don't get the limelight, right? And they're the ones who give you, right, their kids that give their parents time away. There's a spouse that gives the husband or the wife's time, right, to do this thing, right, to make this difference. And I think just as important, right, your family must believe in this as much as you do. Yeah. So there's that that financial sacrifice that you make. Then there's also that
Personal.
that family sacrifice, but there's that personal, there's also that time sacrifice that you make. Right? And you realize that you give up your own free time. And as like therapists, right, we always talk about self-care. We always talk about like, telling our youths that, or our clients and our patients, right, that you need to take care of yourself, you need to be kind to yourself. But sometimes, when you're put in this situation, all that goes out the window, right? And you tell yourself like, I need to be kind to my clients and my patients, cannot be kind to myself. I need to make sure I do this. I need to make sure I get this right, right? And there is definitely that risk of burnout. It's very real. So there is that sacrifice that you have to make. And I would say that you have to kind of be ready for that. But at the same time, that should not be your life for the next 20 years, right? You can expect that to be your life for the next 2 years.
Okay. So
All right, but not for the next 20 years.
How many years has it been?
For me,
It's 7
right?
years, right?
Yeah, I think life got a little bit easier after the 3rd year or 4th year. Yeah.
So once things got more stable, huh?
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess you're in the first year. What are some of the challenges you faced?
I'm in the middle of everything he said, okay?
Yeah.
So what he said totally resonated with me. And I think it's a wonderful point that you made about the family. No one really sees them because they're behind the scenes. But if it wasn't for my family being patient with me on so many occasions, I really wouldn't have that ability to do what I do now. But even so, I think the biggest thing that I'm still struggling with at this stage is really the self-care part. I was trying to figure out how much time and energy I put into this. Because as an ADHD, one of the things that happens to us is when we are really interested in something, and we really engage in it, like we dig into it, really burrow deep into it, and we call it hyper-focus. And so I think I'm hyper-focusing right now on unlocking ADHD. The good thing is that's why, it's moving quite fast, but the flip side is that the self-care goes down. So, I'm trying to claim that back. So beginning tomorrow, I'm actually taking a lighter workload for the next 2-3 weeks. First time in 1 year. I'm trying to get back into running, which I used to do.
Good.
But
Yeah.
it's still a struggle. But you know what? Every time I feel sort of tired, then when I see the emails or the messages coming in about how people are feeling that because we exist,
Yeah.
they have some hope and they know where to go
Yeah.
to find support, then I think it's really worth it.
Yeah, so that bigger sense of purpose and
Oh, yeah,
meaning in the
absolutely.
work that you're doing kind of fuels you to keep going, even though there's lots and lots of sacrifices going
Yeah,
on.
and one thing I've been surprised about, I didn't expect when I first started this journey, was really the friendships that were made. Because a year ago when we started, like everyone was a stranger. And now we have about 160 volunteers. And many of my volunteers, especially my core team, that have really sacrificed. I mean, I had people that pull all-nighters for me, even though they were working full-time and they were parents. That shows you the depth of passion to do something like this. They were so supportive and we're there for each other. So in a way, it's become almost like a little support group.
Yeah.
Even though we're like, fellow volunteers, fellow colleagues. And beyond that, one of my volunteers actually told me that volunteering was, in a way, therapy as well. Because then every morning he wakes up with a sense of purpose, which gives him the energy to do his job better. So, since getting busier with us, he actually did better at work as well, which was, to me, fantastic news.
Great.
Yes. Yeah.
Great.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just hearing that advocacy, but in itself, can be the treatment, right? I mean, Farah, you're a psychologist, right? So,
Am I?
I mean, the science of positive psychology is unanimous, right? That it's always the purpose and meaning of doing something that gives life that extra boost, right?
Yeah.
And that in itself can be a treatment for many, a wide range of mental health conditions.
Absolutely.
Right.
So it's a purpose bigger than yourself that keeps you going. Especially sometimes you might feel really, really, really stressed out, very, in the depths of despair, loneliness. But when you know there's something bigger than yourself out there, it just keeps you going, and one foot in front.
Because
of
the focus is not so much on oneself, but it's on outside, right?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
for myself personally, I sort of know how I'm wired. I'm not exactly internally motivated. I'm externally motivated. It's good to know, so that at least I know how to manage myself.
Yeah.
But because of that, then I can also surround myself with support structures,
Yeah, and
accountability. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I wanted to check in with Esha as well. So in terms of support, it sounds like having people around you and connecting with like-minded individuals, like your volunteers, for example, kind of kept you going in your advocacy work too. And I'm just curious, so other than volunteers, has any, policies or frameworks existing in Singapore that was helpful or unhelpful
Maybe
in your process?
Maybe before we go into policies, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to say this: if one thing that has really helped me is the support of other leaders. Yeah, because nobody else understands a leader except another leader, right? Like, who will understand that you're struggling with accounts, right? Who will understand that you're struggling with staff, and who will understand that you're struggling to write that grant, right? So when we started, we really got a lot of support. We got support from chat, we got support from some of the some of the center heads from Children's Society. Then as we got a little bit older, I made friends with some of the EDs, from other mental health organizations, like Campus Psy, like Caregivers Alliance, and I think just having that community really makes a lot of difference. I remember there was a time whereby I was really struggling with work, just work, just feeling very burnout. And I was just going for a meeting with a few other leaders, and my friend Jane, right, from SMH, she's one of the directors there. She just looked at me and said, "Asher, you okay?" I just needed it, right? I just needed another person who could put herself in my shoes, right, to say like, "Hey, you okay or not?" Right? And they all were like, "Hey, go and take care of yourself." Right? Go make sure you go and sleep, right? And you need that from another person. And it's powerful to hear that from someone who gets you. Yeah. And besides that, I mean, we think about policy. I'm not really going to say that it's gonna be a struggle or not, but there's gonna be a wait.
Oh, sorry, what?
There's gonna be a wait.
A wait.
Yeah, because, I mean, you know, we're both, you're gonna be a charity, right, soon, right? So, and we walk that charity journey as well, and you know, there's that whole process of like starting up a company and applying for charity, right, for charity status, and then proving that, you know, you're gonna be a charity. And you know what, we did it twice, you know, because we started as social enterprise. So I had to prove to Race, right, that we're going to be a good social enterprise. Then, like, you know, 6 months later, we closed down, we become charity, right? So we then had to go and work with, like, you know, with MSF, you know, with the different government bodies. But I have to say, you know, that we were really blessed that along the way, I think there are a lot of the right people in the right place.
Yep.
You know, the people who were supporting us, you know, to get the charity status were wonderful. Like, they would guide me along the way, right? And I think it's just gotten better. We just got IPC.
And what is IPC?
IPC is the Institute of like Public Character, and we can give like tax rebates now and all that when people donate to us. And you know, at the start when we applied for it, and we were told that you know, like, hey, there are certain things in the constitution that is like, and they asked us, and at first we were like, hey, you know, do we have to go and fight for this? Do we have to argue for this? So we responded, and then they were like, hey, no, it's not. We're not nitpicking. We're saying that this needs to change, and we're going to help you along the way.
Okay.
So this, change it. Get back to us.
And who is this person who is running through that with you?
This was a lady from MSF.
Ah, okay.
Right, and it wasn't like, you know, it's not like I'm not nitpicking on you, you know. I'm not going to cancel your application because you didn't do well enough. It's like, hey, this one change, this one change, this one change. We believe in the work they're doing.
Right. So she was guiding you through the process.
Absolutely, I agree with that. 'Cause that's what I experienced
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
And I think really it's been very helpful. I know there's a wait, right? There's going to be a wait because there's a lot of due process. But with the wait also comes the fact that I think a lot of people, you know, from the government bodies, especially in this area, I can't speak for other areas, right? But in this area, they're very helpful and very supportive. Yeah, I think even in like applying for grants, you know, there was a grant that we didn't get. You know, we didn't get because the policies and the structures changed while we were applying for it. Right. So, but you know, NCCS sent us, like, you know, they sent us 2 people, you know, to walk the entire journey with us. Sit down with you. This is how you write the grant. This is how you prepare this. This is how you do that. Right. These are the things that we want to put as outcomes. This is how you think about outcomes, right?
Yeah.
And they spend like days, you know, like at our office. There was one session that they did at our house, at my house, right? Then there were a few sessions that they did in the NCSS office just to help us prepare.
Good.
Yeah, and I believe this, that, you know, that so far, I've really had great support. Yeah.
Great.
Right.
Yeah, I find that you know, in my interactions the last couple of months, whether it's with other organizations or government ministries, there's really been a lot of grace. First of all, grace, kindness, because as Asher said, right, when people are in this particular sector, they're there because they have a heart that wants to do something for the community that's being served. So it's really not in their interest to sort of put hurdles in our way. It's really to try to help structure our growth, you know, because, you know, for someone like myself, and I don't know about Asher maybe as well, who are not used to certain ways of doing things or a certain kind of a sector. So there's a lot of learning to do. So having structures and people to support and mentor, that's really been key. I did not expect again to see such favor, as what I put it, favor and goodwill.
Yeah.
So it's been also a very pleasant surprise and very encouraging.
Yeah, good to hear that you both have had encouraging journeys in the community. I'm just curious because we have Dr. Tay, who is from the healthcare industry. Like, what have your interactions been with healthcare professionals in your journey in setting up your organizations? And, yeah.
I think for myself, we definitely treasure the healthcare professionals that we work with because key to thriving with ADHD really is clarity about the condition. So a diagnosis is pretty key, and then management of it. But I've realized in the last couple of months, the biggest thing that we actually can do with mental health professionals is actually collaboration, because there really are not enough resources. Whether it's in terms of professionals or even expertise with this very niche area.
Right.
And it is not very reasonable of us to expect overnight.
Yeah.
There's going to be some miracle happening that suddenly everything is resolved. So a lot of it also comes to what we call ADHD literacy,
Right.
to understand more about the condition so that we know as well what's needed so that we can play an active part in how we progress and grow. So that's where the collaboration is, I think.
Definitely.
Mm.
Yeah, Moonlake, you have no idea how many patients come to me because they have seen your website, read through your webpage, learned about ADHD,
Okay.
and after talking to their friends and families, they suspect that they have this condition, and then they come to me. So, in a way, you are the funnel into my clinic, you see.
Oh dear.
And it's such a humbling experience to hear Moon and Asher talk about their startups and helping that advocacy organizations, because that's really the groundwork, right? That's really the groundwork, the grassroots, if you will. And then, as a psychiatrist, I can only see maybe 20 patients a day. I can only help 10 to 20 families a day. But Asher, in his third or fourth year, is helping like 1,000, reaching out to 1,000 patients a month, right? So it's really a humbling experience.
Thank you.
And for ADHD in particular, it's really under-recognized and underdiagnosed in Singapore. Like, 2 to 5% of adults may have it.
Yep.
Great.
So a lot of it boils down to that public education, that domain. And that's also a regular resource that I refer my patients to,
Yeah.
Thank
your
you.
website.
Thank you very
So
much.
I have a question for you, Dr. Tay.
Yes.
So how do you think healthcare professionals can support groups
Right.
like Limitless and ADHD in their journey?
Right. So there's that whole ecosystem, right? And like the mental health clinic with the psychiatrist or the therapy with the psychologist is really at the tip of the iceberg. But below that, there is a whole range, like maybe thousands and hundreds of thousands of Singaporean residents who need mental health help. And they might not need medications, they might not need formal psychological therapy. And that's where advocacy organizations like Ashes and Moonlake's can really help to plug up the gaps
Yeah.
and to pick up the important, difficult cases and refer upwards.
Yeah.
Right.
And do you see yourself being involved in organizations like this? Maybe
Yeah.
providing like subject matter expertise and so on and so forth?
Right, definitely, right.
Yeah.
So as doctors, we are trained to be clinicians first. We go through medical school. We are trained to treat, diagnose, do investigations, prescribe medications. Right. A lot of us when we were trained in the public sector, we were also trained to be educators. So we teach medical students and junior doctors as specialists, right? And some of us are researchers, like kind of we publish research and find out more about the science of it, right? But increasingly, a fourth or fifth role that a specialist can play is really to be an advocate, right? And an advocate can be an advocate for the patient individually, or the family, or the whole community, like what Moon is trying to do for the ADHD community.
Yeah.
Right. So I really feel like clinicians should have a stake in such organizations,
Yeah.
and it should be a two-way street where we can offer something to the advocacy organizations, and they in turn can help us support our patients.
Absolutely. So like what you mentioned, it truly is an ecosystem when it comes to managing, people within this population.
Yeah.
Yeah,
whether it's
I
ADHD.
think that just an individual alone or even an organization alone is not going to be able to move
Yeah.
too much. It really is the whole
And
community.
it takes time as well.
Yeah.
And it does take time. But I want to move away from advocacy because I think that we've talked about that. And let's go to self-advocacy, which is kind of the crux of today's session. Like, what are your thoughts about self-advocacy?
I think for myself, it's something I'm still learning and developing. And I think a part of it comes from really knowing oneself. Because if you don't know yourself and also accept yourself as you are and feel a certain sense of confidence, you would not dare speak up. And because of that, then you wouldn't advocate for yourself, because
So
you
it
always
starts with self-awareness.
self-awareness and really treasuring yourself. Because if you didn't value yourself, then why would you even want to advocate for yourself? And I think another component of it actually is, let's say in the case of unlocking ADHD or ADHD, is really understanding the condition a little bit better, so that you know in situations where you might be with, whether it's a mental health professional, a teacher or parent or whatever, that may have a different kind of experience or belief, you can also look at it very factually to see whether that is in line with what's out there in the literature and your own experience, and then look at it very analytically. And that takes a certain measure of awareness, but also confidence.
Yeah.
And then you can advocate or seek a second opinion or just give a different perspective.
And Asha, what do you think self-advocacy would look like?
I think I come from a mental health perspective, particularly a youth perspective. Because right now we're looking at 1 in 7 Singaporeans will struggle with a mental health disorder in their lifetime, right? But 1 in 5 youths of this generation will struggle with mental health disorder in their lifetime. So number is starting to increase drastically. But yet at the same time, we also look at the data. Up to 2/3 of young people will never seek help for their mental health issues. So 1/3 to 2/3, right? It takes an average of 6 years for someone to seek help. And when we think about advocacy for self, I believe this, a lot of it is also, what's the stigma involved? How much does it take for me to be able to tell someone that I'm struggling? Right? How much does it take for me to be able to reach out for help? And it's never easy. And we see the journeys that the young people take to go and reach out for help. Sometimes self-advocacy might mean I need to have a chat with my mom. Sometimes it might mean after having that chat with my mom and getting turned down, getting told that there's nothing wrong with me, or I need to pray more, read the Bible more, right? Sometimes getting told by my mom that there's nothing wrong with me. Don't shame the family, right? I have to take that very difficult step and then have that conversation with a professional on my own. With the fear, right, that professional's gonna call my mom. Sometimes it takes that. And I think it can be very challenging for people, and I think that's why, right, that's why that psychoeducation needs to take place. When we combine advocacy and self-advocacy, essentially when we talk about advocating for the people who cannot speak up, right, it makes self-advocacy easier.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I believe, it will come a time, in maybe the years to come, maybe only when the millennials become parents, right? Maybe, right? But it, there will come a time whereby being able to say to your parents, or say to your teachers, or say to your best friend, I've not been feeling very well. Will become normal.
So it sounds like self-advocacy starts with the awareness that, hey, I'm not doing well. And having the courage to say that to yourself, and then maybe to people around you, and actually accessing that service. And so Dr. T, in your clinic thus far, how has self-advocacy appeared, if at all?
Right. Yeah, so I kind of agree with Asher that the flip side of advocacy is almost like stigma, right? Stigma is built on ignorance, a lack of knowledge, and prejudice and self-judgment. And there is this term like self-stigma. Stigma is not always directed from the external and society to the patient or to the person with the mental health struggle. Right? Oftentimes, stigma can be generated within oneself because of negative judgment, shame, feelings of guilt, the misery. You feel like you're just not worth it. You're just not enough, and you don't have a place to advocate for yourself because the self-esteem and confidence is just not there, right? Right. So it starts with having knowledge, understanding the condition, and then acceptance, and then having the courage to seek help and share your problems with your family, your teachers, and then perhaps even the world.
Yeah.
And that's self-advocacy, right?
Yeah.
And if you can do that for yourself, maybe you can, like what Moonlake is doing, take the lead for the entire, community in need of help, in need of information, support, and mental health support.
Yeah, and so in your clinic, do you see a lot of that happening where your
Right.
patients are getting a bit more knowledgeable? Are they speaking up? Are they,
Yes.
or just taking your word for it? How
Especially
about
for the youth.
Yeah, especially for youth, right?
Especially for the youth.
Uh-huh.
There is really a cultural difference. I mean, the elderly patients that I see, they might, their thinking is maybe that the doctors should be the authority in their treatment plan, and they might defer to me to decide on the type of medications they take, the type of therapy they attend, the frequency of coming back to see me. But the youth nowadays, they really come armed with knowledge after going through Ashes and Moonlake's resources, right? They come armed with a whole range of knowledge, and some of them are even more knowledgeable than me about their own mental health conditions because they have been the experts and they have that lived experience, to be the experts, and something that I might not have because I don't have that lived experience that they had for however many years that they delayed, right? The treatment gap of 6 years that Asher talked about,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that makes them the authority, in their treatment plan.
Yeah.
And I am simply there to facilitate their recovery as a co-therapist or co-driver of sorts along their journey towards wellness, you see.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that to me is a very encouraging sign. And I often take the cue from the self-advocate,
Good.
And of course, we do no harm, right? So if they come with misconceptions and all wrong ideas, well, of course it's my job to correct the misconceptions and institute my treatment plan for them. But if it's reasonable and it's sensible, I'm all the happier to I'm all the more supportive to go along with their plan.
Yeah.
And that also increases their compliance to treatment,
Yeah.
adherence to treatment.
Yeah.
That builds that trust with myself.
Yeah.
It validates their experience
Yeah.
and their distress.
Absolutely.
And it's been a pleasant journey working with youth.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's something that's new, you see. Maybe 5 to 10 years ago, it's not that prevalent.
Yep.
But self-advocates are more and more prevalent nowadays, and it's a good sign. Yeah.
And Asher, you wanted to say something.
I just want to add, if you are watching and you're struggling, right, can I just say this, that, or you're struggling to talk to your mom or talk to your parents and they don't understand and they're making things worse and all that stuff, right? Can I just say that self-advocacy also includes sometimes getting a professional on board. I just remember there was one client that Victor and I had together. Where's Victor? Somewhere, right? Victor is Kai Hong's co-founder, right, for Private Space. And when Victor was in the hospital previously, I remember there was one client that came in and the mom, right, did not understand, totally not psychologically minded, right? Don't understand what she's going through. And this girl was having panic attacks and severely needed that anti-anxiety medication, right? And there will reach a point for certain conditions whereby medication must come in before therapy can become effective,
Absolutely, yeah.
right? So, I was working with her for a while already, and we realized that we need the medication. So the thing is, she's underage.
Right. Yeah.
She's underage. Her mom doesn't believe in mental illness. So what happened was that we had to, I had to bring her to the hospital, work with Victor, and call the mom. And Victor and I had this, Dr. Victor and I had the conversation with the mom to talk about the condition, to say this is how your daughter is struggling. It's not that she's being naughty, right? It's not that there's anything wrong with her. She's struggling with mental illness, and these are the medications for her, and there's the risk involved and all that stuff. Well, what will the medication do? but we believe this, that, you know, your daughter needs your support.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why she's come to us. Yeah.
And she needed to take that first step
Mm.
in advocating for herself to even reach you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so part of the importance too is actually reaching out to the loved ones so that they are more aware and then they can extend that support. And you know, at Unlocking ADHD, one of the feedback that we receive from our adult ADHDers is many times the older members of the family don't really know what ADHD is, they've never heard of it, because there's very limited materials available in the mother tongue languages. So one day I was having a shower and I thought, hey, you know what, maybe we should have a microsite, you know, in the different languages. So just from that crazy idea, you know, again, our wonderful volunteers, we launched a Chinese microsite, a Malay microsite. Dr. Farah was actually on our launch webinar in Malay. You know, we're launching Tamil on July 1st, and one of my volunteers actually is here in the studio tonight. So we had the feedback from the Malay and Chinese launches that because the older family members were also watching the webinar, then there were more conversations opened up because there was vocabulary.
Yeah.
You know, before that there wasn't that vocabulary. So that's really so important. And you know, as a parent myself, one of the things that we sometimes are guilty of is, you know, we're so used to delegating and outsourcing everything that we think that we could outsource certain things like therapy and coaching and tuition, right?
Yeah.
So when we have our events, I sometimes share with parents the airplane safety video analogy. You know, when the oxygen mask falls, you put it on yourself, then on your child. So even with Unlocking ADHD, we know we talk about our mission being empowering ADHDers and their families to live life to the fullest. We're saying parents, you need to be part of the solution. If your child has ADHD, consider whether, you know, there's a genetic link, whether you might be also having similar symptoms, and if so, then do something to get yourself assessed and treated so that you can have a longer, more sustainable support for your child. So that's really important, the environment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely the support has to be all around.
Yeah.
Again, falling back to self-advocacy. Dr. Tay, what do you think you can do, or what can you advise other healthcare professionals, you know, in their quest to facilitate self-advocacy amongst their patients?
Right, right. So yeah, it's really boils down to the basics, you see, right? Validating the patient's experience, not dismissing their distress, you know, and listening to the stories from all around the families, right? Not just to the patient. For example, you might have to advocate on behalf of the patient to the mom who doesn't understand. You might have to advocate on behalf of the student to the teachers who might not understand what ADHD is.
Okay. And would you
Right.
encourage them to also speak up as part of their journey of you know, in
Definitely right, yeah.
because it's self-advocacy at some point, like at least for me, because I'm a psychologist, right? And so I always tell my patients at the end of the day, while I'm your therapist, I only see you for a smidgen of time in our session. And at the end of the day, kind of like what Kai Hong said, you are the experts in your life. You know what's best for you. So there are times when patients say, can you speak to mom for me? Or can you speak to my spouse for me? And in those moments, I would sit with them and we process that, and you know, we kind of find ways like, how can we give you the voice so you can speak up for yourself, because this is your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even in the treatment, when we discuss, and this is how I think most of my colleagues work as well, and actually you would know, is in therapy, we make it collaborative. And so for those of you who are watching and you're not quite sure what on earth therapy entails, you know, it's not, you know, the therapist is not going to tell you what to do. It's a process of discovery, a process of collaboration, a process where we want to empower you with a voice.
And supporting your choices and
And
autonomy,
supporting
right?
your choices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, and again, I think as a therapist, that's how, I mean, at least for me, and I think Asha and my colleagues can also say, is we want to promote self-advocacy, because again, you are the driver in your car of, you know, towards the journey of your life. Yeah. Any other comments on self-advocacy?
I think the other thing that came to my mind as a parent is when my two daughters were growing up, one of the things I always dreaded was the parent-teacher meeting, because usually I feel like I'm the customer service officer, and I'm fielding complaints, and I'm just apologizing, you know, left, right, and center, and saying, yeah, I'll look into it, I'll talk to my daughter. And so I went through many years like that, and it brought me a whole bunch of stress. And it always feels like you're the only parent with all these issues, and other parents seem to have such perfect children, you know. But over the last few years, I've realized that I did not advocate for my child. I did not stand up for them, right? And sometimes we as parents actually need to make a stance by saying, excuse me, I think, you know, my kid is maybe struggling a bit too much with all the homework being piled on, you know, would you consider giving her a longer time to get it done, or maybe reducing it? Or my daughter needs to take a few days off before the exam, you know. So it's changed the way I looked at things. So if they're a bit too young to advocate for themselves, then perhaps we as parents don't just take everything and just say yes sir, you know, but actually think, is this right for my child? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great. And I think at this point, I'm just wondering, and I know this is not on the table, but I'm curious, since we have a live audience, are there any questions from the floor about self-advocacy? Okay. Great. Okay. So I think we've had a very interesting session today, hearing your respective journeys and even your experiences working with patients. And we hear that there's a lot of information out there, you know, that there's a lot of support for setting up advocacy groups. Although it might be difficult and challenging in the first few years, is to remind yourself of your values and, you know, the meaning and purpose behind why you're doing the work that you do. And, you know, we want to cultivate a culture of people feeling comfortable enough to kind of face and be okay with what they're experiencing and their struggles, and actually going out there and seeking support and help for themselves and their family members. Great. Okay, so I think we're pretty much done. Is there any parting comments before we wrap this up? Just one last one.
I'm reminded of MOH's. I mean, I'm a doctor, right? So MOH is so I'm reminded of MOH's 3 Beyonds that the health minister set some years ago, right? There's the beyond healthcare to health. So looking not just at treatment and curative processes, but to preventative upstream processes, right? And screening and information to the public outreach and all this. And beyond the hospital to the community, right? So my sense is that advocacy and self-advocacy is instrumental in these two, at least these two beyonds, right? Driving healthcare not just from curative processes to preventative health, and also to the wider community outside of clinics and hospitals, right? And it's really thanks to organizations like Unlocking ADHD and Limitless that they are the groundwork, right? The social services and the groundwork to catch the patients who are falling through the gaps, and then linking them up with healthcare providers, right?
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, and so once again, thank you very much for joining us for our very first conversation series. So keep a lookout on Instagram and our webpage for more information on the subsequent talks and discussions to come. All right, thank you everyone.